Bob came to Nebraska from Wyoming and started out as a graduate assistant coach and also going to graduate school. And back in 1962, most of the players who were recruited were growing up under the same roof with both biological parents. And it was a very different world. And time went on, I began to see a lot of changes. A lot more kids growing up with only one parent, quite often without a dad. And then in the late 60s, early 70s, the drug culture began to evolve. And we started drug testing our players. and of course, some of the changes in media, some of the things you see on the internet, in movies, music lyrics today would not have been allowed in the public domain maybe 20, 30 years ago. And so I began to reflect on that. And my wife, Nancy, had seen a segment of 60 Minutes in which an elderly gentleman named Eugene Lang had been interviewed. And he had gone to speak at the 8th grade graduation of his former middle school. And when he got there, he was kind of shocked by the way the school had changed, because it now was in the inner city. And when he had gone there, it had been in the rather wealthy suburbs. And he asked the superintendent how many of these kids he thought would go on to college. And he said, well, really, we'll probably be pretty fortunate if one of them goes on to college. And that shocked him, because when he'd gone to school there, almost everybody was planning on going to college. And so kind of on a whim, when he got up to speak to the young people, he said, if you guys will stay out of trouble graduating high school, I'll pay your way to college. So Nancy was kind of impressed by that. She said, do you think we could do something like that? And I said, well, the coaching didn't pay that much then. I said, I don't think we're quite ready to put an elementary school through college. But I said, I'll see what I can do. So I got in front of our players next day in a team meeting. I said, how many of you guys be willing to serve as a mentor to 7th to 8th grade boys in Lincoln Public Schools? And 22 hands went up. So with the public schools, it was 22 young guys that said, yeah, we'd like to have football players as a mentor. And as time went on, things seemed to go pretty well. We just told the players to meet with them once a week. And once a month we'd get them together. We'd have a speaker, play some basketball, have some pizza. And then a couple of years later, I got a little nervous, because at that time we could drop out of school at age 16. And these kids were getting pretty close to 16. And so I got a meeting with them, and I said, you guys will stay out of trouble. Graduating from high school, we'll pay you way to college. And so we were surprised, because by the time they got to be seniors, the 21 graduated on time. The one guy who didn't graduate on time was riding dirt bikes around the country. He was on a motocross tour making money. He did graduate eventually. Good. And the thing that really surprised us was that of the 22, 18 went on to college. And we thought maybe from that particular group that 5 or 6 might go on. And so we thought, well, maybe there's something to this. And so we expanded the program here in Lincoln, first of all, using adults rather than college football players. We didn't have enough players. And then we spread it across the state. And now we're in 5 states. And last year we mentored 11,000 kids. So it's changed a lot. It's school-based and meet once a week. Most of it's over the lunch period. Lunch periods are usually 35, 40 minutes in length. And so it's fairly easy. We have building coordinators in every building. And the coordinator helps make the match based on common interests. And they find a place to meet. It might be the library, it might be the lunchroom, wherever. And so we've been pleased with the results, because we find that in about 80 to 85% of our matches, then behavior improves. Fewer trips to the principal's office, less substance abuse, less teenage pregnancy, all those kind of things. We also find that attendance improves at about 85% of matches. Grades get better. And last year, our graduation rate for roughly 750 kids that graduated from high school was 96%.
Awesome.
I think that's usually high because a lot of our kids are not from the most affluent homes, and a lot of them don't have both parents. And so we know it works, and we certainly are appreciative of the partnership with the schools because they help us with some of the logistics of the thing. And so that's what we do.
Absolutely.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that's great. And there's a lot of nonprofits around. We're both here in Omaha, and there's a lot of nonprofits here in Omaha as well that do a lot of great things with the kids, and that mentoring is definitely a huge aspect of these kids' lives. So that's fantastic. So you talked a little bit about your players and how they were excited and everybody's hand went up. Is mentoring within the Husker football program, is that something that's still going on with teammates? Do you see a lot of players still come through? Is it kind of hit and miss over the last 20 some odd years since you've been out of coaching?
Well, I don't want to give the impression that everybody's hands went up because 150 players and 22 hands went up. But there were some pretty prominent players, like Will Shields was one of our early mentors, and we've had a number of guys. Jason Light, who is now the general manager of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, happened to be one of those initial mentors for us. And a lot of those guys have stayed in touch with their mentees through all these years. And so, we do have some from the athletic department. And of course, we rely on anybody as a mentor has to be over 19 years of age. And most of our average mentor is probably in their 40s.
Okay.
And usually somewhat professional people. And but we have mentors that are in their 80s, like me, and we have some that are 19 years old. So they're across the full spectrum.
Okay. Well, happy belated birthday, by the way.
Saw those a couple of days ago.
Just a couple of days ago.
So I've had a lot of them.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, happy belated birthday.
They're more important when I was 4 years old than they are when.
I'm sure. So when you were coaching, obviously, did you kind of feel that responsibility to be a mentor to some of these guys, some of these players that were coming in that, like you said, were maybe coming from broken families or didn't have weren't living under the roof of two biological parents?
There are formal mentors, formal mentoring programs like teammates, and then there's informal mentoring. And I think I know Tony Dungy said it, and I think John Wooden said it too. That part of coaching is mentoring, essentially. You're trying to convey X's and O's and techniques and fundamentals, but essentially you're hoping that you can help people mature and become better people. And I think the fundamental issue is that players understand that you care about them, not just for what they can do for you on the athletic field, but you genuinely care about their health, you care about their education, you care about their personal life, and you want the best for them. Then they will usually respond, and they will sometimes do unbelievably difficult things that you ask them to do if they feel your motivation is right and that you're really trying to serve them and care for them. And hopefully that came to most of our players.
Good.
Really
Okay. So obviously right now with teammates and the whole mentoring aspect, a lot of mentoring is great to be in person and do everything in person. COVID's probably put a big damper on a lot of those mentoring activities that you would normally do. How has teammates gotten around some of that as far as keeping those relationships solid and continuing to move the needle in the right direction? Obviously with kids also so much virtual learning, there's got to be some sort of learning curve that they're going to have to battle moving forward. What is teammates currently doing to help with that?
Well, this last year, as you know, has been really difficult for a lot of kids. And a lot of kids feel very much isolated. And emotionally, it's really been very difficult for them. And a lot of the normal support systems are just not there. And so we've developed a portal, and we've set it up so we can do virtual mentoring. Obviously, we much prefer face-to-face, one-to-one mentoring, but with a lot of kids not even physically in school, we've had to do that. And so right now, about half of our matches are meeting in person, and about half of them are virtual. And we're hoping that as the spring progresses, that'll become more 80-20 or something like that, with more in-person mentoring. But it's been very difficult for people in the schools to try to manage this whole thing. And I think statistically, an awful lot of kids have lost the better part of a year of education. Some kids that are being taught virtually have kind of tuned out, and there's not any real good way to monitor and to make sure people are paying attention. And so it's been a hard time for administrators, for teachers, for students, and so we're just doing the best we can to struggle through it.
Good. And
Well,
I work for a local
And-
nonprofit and after school programming, so we've been feeling the same thing here.
and my wife's a teacher, so I know we know how it is.
Well, good.
Yeah. So what would your message be for people who are thinking about mentoring?
Well, I think the the average mentor assumes that this is all a one-way street. They're doing all the giving, and the student is the recipient. And but I hear over and over again when I talk to mentors, they say, I think I get as much or more out of this than the mentee does. And that was always puzzling to me. And so finally, I picked out 20, I think it was 50 people who had been long-term mentors for teammates. And I sent them an email. I said, I hear this all the time, that mentors receive a lot from the process. I said, what do you mean by this? And so I got about 50 responses back. It was kind of interesting because they gave a variety of answers. Some of them said, well, this has made me a better parent because I began to see the power of giving somebody your undivided attention and not trying to tell them what to do, but simply listening and being an advocate for them and being there and caring about them. And they say, I began to do that with my own children because I saw how important that was to my mentee. Some of them said, well, I kind of have forgotten what it was like to be a young person. And this gives me a window into the life of young people and the things they're going through. And of course, things have changed a lot since those mentors, for the most part, were young people. And so they think it's a learning experience. And that's been good. But I think overall, when you boil all those answers down, what they really meant was it gives your life a sense of meaning and purpose. And so I remember there was a study done a few years ago where they asked several thousand Americans if they were happy. And most Americans said, well, yeah, I feel fairly happy. I have adequate clothing, enough discretionary wealth. I can go to a movie, I have transportation, and life's pretty good. But essentially, happiness was defined basically in terms of receiving, of getting. And then they asked the same question of those same people, does your life have meaning or purpose? And the answer came back, in a lot of cases, not so much. My life doesn't have significance or purpose or meaning. And what they found was that meaning and purpose essentially comes from giving and serving and caring about another person, particularly another person who on the surface of it can't do anything for you in return. Pretty nice to serve your boss and they give you a raise.
Yeah.
Your spouse because they can get along better.
Yeah.
But when you pick somebody out like a young kid that you don't even know, and you're there for them, and they come to understand that you love them, you care for them. It's very rewarding when you see them begin to get back on track. When you see them graduate from the 8th grade and graduate from high school and go on to college. And quite often those relationships go on for years and years and years. And so I think that's really the benefit that mentors get out of mentoring.
That's great. And you know, like I said, we have the utmost respect for teammates and what you guys are doing for these kids and in the schools, and hopefully things start to calm down a little bit where, like you said, you get more of that 80-20 and get close to that 100% of the in-person. So you have even a greater impact. And so for those of you listening right now, if you're interested in learning more about Teammates, the website is teammates.org. We will throw up some information on our page here after the show. If you're interested in learning more and maybe even getting involved with Teammates, they are a great program and do a lot of great things for our communities and helping these kids. So Tom, we'd like to thank you just talking about Teammates. Anything else you want to add before we switch over to a couple football questions while we got you for a few more minutes?
No,
Okay.
that's fine. Yeah.
All right. Well, Jimmy's going to shoot us off with the first football question here.
Okay, so obviously we could spend 5, 10, 20 minutes going through your list of accomplishments, but we'll kind of keep it brief. Obviously you're a Hall of Fame coach, national championships, the whole works. But looking back, is there, any thought in your mind of maybe after that last year, maybe sticking around a little bit longer, or how that would have played out if you would have stayed a little bit longer?
Well, the issue was that I had told Frank Solich about 6 years before that I would go 5 more years. And so the 5 years came, and and it was 1996. And so we had 2 players, Grant Wistrom and Jason Peter, who were juniors. And it was pretty much consensus they would be first round picks. So they came in to see me, and I thought I was going to hear the words, well, I've got to do what's best for me and my family. And instead they said, Coach, we lost 2 games this year. I said, yeah, I was aware of that. And they said, well, we didn't think that was good enough. I said, well, I was a little disappointed myself. And they said, well, we're going to come back and we're going to finish it up right. And so I said, well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. And so then I went to Frank. I said, this is the end of 5 years, but I don't feel right about these guys coming back and then me taking off. And so I said, I'd like to go 1 more year. He said, okay. And so that next year in 1997, we did win them all. Got a little tight down at Missouri where we had to kick the ball up in the air and had Matt Davison catch it. And then the good thing was it set Matt up for the rest of his life, because he became a hero. And but we did win them all. And so at that point I stepped aside simply because I'd made a promise. And I felt I had to keep that promise. And I talked it over with Bill Byrne, and I talked it over with the chancellor at that time. And they okayed it and said, we've got a good staff, we've got good players, and I think things continue on. And it's not going to be a wholesale change. We have somebody coming in who doesn't understand the culture. And they said, okay. So that's when Frank took over. And And sometimes I'm irritated because people say, well, we haven't had a good team in 20, 22 years or something like that. And Frank Solich won a lot of games.
Mhm.
He won a Big 12 championship. He came within one fumble at the 3-yard line against Texas of having a perfect season. He played for a national championship, won 75% of his games. And most of the people in the College Football Hall of Fame have not come anywhere close to winning 75%. So he did a good job. And then for whatever reason, after a 9-3 season, they fired Frank.
Mhm.
And some of the coaches that came since were not bad people. They're good. Bo Pelini won over 70% of his games.
Yeah.
But some of them didn't understand the culture, didn't understand certain things. And so we struggled a little bit since. Now Scott understands the culture. And one coach tried to disband the walk-on program. And that was really, see what happened at one time in the old Big 8 conference. We had 45 initial scholarships every year, and there was no upper limit. So if you kept your players around, you had 160 players on scholarship. And then the first year that I became head coach, NCAA came in and said, we're going to have a national standard. And so the initial scholarships you can give out will be 35. And then the upper limit would be like 120, something like that. And then they whittled it down to 25 initials and 85 total. And so we began to think about it. And we realized that when we had those 45 initials and 150 guys on scholarship, a lot of times the best player we had on the team was the 44th or the 45th guy we offered. And we realized that a lot of those kids came from Nebraska, came from small towns. And so if we worked hard at developing them, and they would give you maximum effort, they had good character, they're almost by definition overachievers. And so we began to work at the walk-on thing. And we realized that was a big part because we don't have the population base here that Ohio has, or Florida, or California, or Texas. And therefore, you're going to have maybe 3 or 4 really top-notch players a year. And you're going to have another 15 or 20 that are going to have a chance. And so we began to work at that. And that's why I think every school has some idiosyncrasies. It's important to have somebody who understands what it takes and what the culture has to be. And I think Scott has kind of gotten it swung around now to where these guys understand what it takes. And I think he feels really good about his team this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's this year, and he said it before, it might be one of his best teams from a talent standpoint. And, Jimmy's going to ask you, we'll ask you 2 more questions if that's okay. Again, don't want to take up too much time. So yeah, I think Scott's kind of on the right track as well. Obviously, we're huge fans. You can see our Jimmy's posters behind us here with the 3 championships and you being held up in one of them. So big fans of Scott Frost. So we see him on the right track. So what are some really good, you mentioned the walk-on program, how that's improved over the last couple of years with Scott. What are some other really good things that you're seeing that makes you think that this program, or maybe you don't think this, but maybe the program is turning in the right direction and maybe this year is the year where we start to see a little bit more of those wins?
Well, I think a lot of the leadership on the team this year will come from people that have been recruited exclusively by Scott. And I think that will help. And sometimes people agonize over people leaving the program, oh, this guy transferred or whatever. But the average Power 5 team in the country has lost 9 transfers this year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with the transfer portal and all the things that the NCAA and other people have changed, it's kind of a revolving door. And so what's happened in Nebraska has happened to practically every other school in the country. The thing that's amazing to me is how many of these guys, particularly on the defensive side, have decided to come back for that extra year. And so the defense is going to return almost 100%. It's not exactly, but it's going to be close. And I think we've got some good players coming up that are young guys. And I think the walk-on program is beginning to kick in because these guys are normally not going to be surefire first team starting players the first year or even the second year. And if you think about it, that first year that Scott recruited, he stayed down at Central Florida, coached the bowl game. And that was the first year that they had the early signing period. So I think it was December 18th before he even got here. About 80% of the players in the country were signed. And so they did the best they could. And they took some kids that they felt could play. But that was almost a throwaway year. So he hasn't really had 3 complete recruiting years. He's had 2. I'd say he had 2.5. And if I think back to Bill McCartney, and if I think back to Bill Snyder at K-State, I don't think those guys had a winning season for 4 or 5 years when they took over. And we had slipped enough that it was almost a complete rebuild. And so I think he'll be fine.
Okay.
We think so too.
Yeah.
We're big Frost fans.
Yeah,
So
we're very excited about this upcoming year. Can't come soon enough. But yep.
So obviously back in your time, social media didn't really play a factor in day-to-day life with your players and staff and just the student body in general. But I mean, nowadays, what type of factor do you think social media is on these players?
Well, there was some of it coming into being toward the end of my coaching career. And we told the players as best they could to stay off of that. And for instance, I did not read the sports page. I'd read the front page on a paper, and maybe some sports writer was ripping me, and he'd come in expecting I'd be mad, not be friendly. I didn't read what he said.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that it wasn't important what they wrote, but I could just keep my head a lot clearer if I didn't get the voice from the grandstand, the letters to the editor, and all that kind of stuff, and to some degree social media. And but it's really hard to keep players off of that stuff, because they're into social media. But if you're the quarterback and you got 200 posts out there blasting you and telling you you're no good, that's hard to live with. And when you're 18, 19, 20 years old. And so I really sympathize with these players and the coaches, because it's really intensified and it's really difficult now.
Absolutely. So one last question, then we'll let you go. We've taken enough of your time today. And again, we appreciate it. Last question. So talking about Nebraska, the current state of the program, the last few years, we've really struggled. People are getting impatient. I think there's probably more people that are willing to give Scott more the time he needs than there are people that aren't. And again, a lot of that impatient you see on social media, and we see it on social media, and it's frustrating for us. But getting into the mind of someone trying to recruit a player as a coach, when your program has not been on the winning side of things for a while now, what's your mindset and what's your pitch to a recruit as a coach in this period of time to get them to come and play in Nebraska?
Well, there are certain things that we've always capitalized on. We have a very good strength program. We have a very good academic program. We care about the players. I think the players throughout all of this have been put first. And that's not true a lot of places. And the main thing is you talk about your program. You don't talk about somebody else and badmouth people. That's not important. But the biggest thing is to get the parents of players on the campus because Lincoln is a relatively safe place.
Mhm.
It's a fairly stable environment. And I think it comes across when they look at the, when they meet with academic people, academic counselors, and the people in the medical area. And then they visit the weight room and NAPL, that's the Nebraska Athletic Performance Lab, and all those things. And I meet with the coaches. I think they realize that this is a good place to send a young person. And they realize that there has been some tradition here. Sometimes kids that are 17, 18 years old, they don't remember Nebraska,
Yeah.
national championship, but their parents do. And so we always felt that was the key thing. And now you can actually pay for the parents to come visit. When I was coaching, we couldn't do that. And so we try to get the parents to buy an airplane ticket 6 months ahead of time, because then when all the recruiting and all this stuff was going on, if they bought a ticket, they're probably going to come. And then when they saw Nebraska, I'd say we really batted a very high percentage on kids that came with their parents, because when they're 17 years old, all kinds of stuff, parties, some girl you met somewhere, and things that really are pretty peripheral, that don't make a whole lot of difference in long term, really influence those kids heavily. And so having an older set of eyes is important.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's been a big impact now. I mean, we're not able to get kids to campus just to get them around. I mean, that they're stopping the in-campus visits, so that's got to be just killing some of that recruiting, just across the country.
Yeah, for everybody, really.
Of course, these Zoom meetings and all this kind of stuff goes on forever, and phone calls. So
Yeah, I can't.
difficult. And some kids being recruited by 20 different schools, you almost have to wait in line to talk to them.
Absolutely.
I can't imagine going on like a Zoom tour of a college.
Yeah, no. Well, Tom, this has been, we've been at a couple of those Nebraska Greats Foundation events. We've had a chance to talk to the Heisman winners, Irving Fryer, Turner Gill, Mike Rozier. We've had Brandon Kinney on the show, Matt Verzal, we talked to a couple of weeks ago. And this has by far been, one of the coolest things we've done, just to be able to talk to you. So we definitely appreciate taking the time to sit and chat with us today, and appreciate everything you do with teammates, and hopefully, we can do this in person at some point. We can sit down with you again in person when things, a little safer around here, but wanted to definitely say thank you for taking the time today.
Appreciate it, Tom.
Thanks for having me on.
So yeah, so we'll throw some information about teammates out on our social media sites as well, and hopefully, if nothing else, we get some marketing information out there for you, and maybe get a couple people interested in helping out. So we'll get that out there. And I did want to say, while you're on, thanks to Hannah Miller and Jackie McKeever for helping get us in touch with you. Jackie is like another mom to me. I've been friends with their son for about 30 years. So, I've known her for a long time. And then Hannah was very nice when I chatted with her. So thank you for being receptive.
I'll talk to Jackie and get her impression of you.
Okay.
It'll be good.
She probably has some really good stories, but don't listen to all of them. They're mostly true, though.
Well, thank you, guys.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Feel free to log off. We'll probably stay on for a couple more minutes, so feel free to log off. And thanks again.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. So
That just happened.
That just happened. I mean, cheers. For those of you that have joined the show, if you've asked questions, sorry we weren't able to get to those questions.
I was trying to keep a lookout, but
it's
we were talking to Tom.
Yeah, a little bit hard on the Zoom. We got a full screen right now, but I mean, wow, that was quite the experience.
We talked about it a little bit before. I hope people weren't disappointed. We were going to talk to Tom about teammates. That was kind of how we got in touch with him. So if you wanted us to talk to him about football for an hour, I mean, we'd love to, but that was kind of what we needed to and wanted to talk to him about mostly.
But again, maybe we get to sit down with him again in the near future, once maybe he's vaccinated or he feels it's safe to meet with us in person. but even just over Zoom, I mean, that was quite the experience. So
Yeah, we had even talked about it like, man, if we could ever talk to Tom Osborne, that'd be sweet. And then it was like, hey, we're gonna talk to Tom Osborne. What?
awesome. Yeah.
So, hope you guys enjoyed.
So thanks for everybody that tuned in today. This is recorded, so we will throw it up on our page. Hopefully the live feed was okay. On our end, it looked fine from the Zoom. Hopefully it was okay on Facebook as well. So
I know Tom was a little quiet. If you're trying to listen on the podcast, it
Yep.
might be kind of hard to hear. We were trying to record it as best we could.
yeah,
but-
so we'll throw the podcast up there. We'll throw some information about teammates. This is probably one of the shortest shows we've had in quite some time. But we do appreciate your time. Appreciate you joining us today. On Wednesday, 6 o'clock, we'll post this as well. 6 o'clock on Wednesday, we're going to have defensive end Des Moines Adams on our show. He's actually going to be with us
in-house.
in Jimmy's house. And we're going to talk to him. So we'll post some information about that as well tomorrow. So you guys can tune in then. And that'll be a little bit easier to receive questions and ask him questions while we're live with him. So again, thank you so much for joining in. Hopefully you enjoyed Tom on the show.
We were enjoying the Hail Varsity.
We got some more Hail Varsity for the show. So cheers to you guys for tuning in. Cheers to Two Average Guys. Thanks for all your support. In the off season, we're going to bring more and more guys on the show in the off season as well. And
I'm not sure we're going to get better than Tom, but we'll try.
We're going to shoot for Scott next. So get him in the off season, right?
I guess.
So we'll see if we can get some hookups. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy your day. Enjoy your Sunday or Saturday. And again, thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, guys.
See
See you next time.
All right.